Welcome back, everyone. I'm so glad you're here today because this story is something special. It's about unexpected connections, difficult choices, and a moment that changed everything. If you enjoy relaxing storytelling like this, take a second to like the video. It really helps the channel grow. And feel free to say hello in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let's begin.
Everyone in the mansion believed Jared had lost his sight. His fiancée thought she was in control. His father, the man who once made the entire underworld tremble, now sat alone in his room, swallowing every humiliation in silence. But what no one knew was that those dark glasses were hiding two wide-open eyes, recording every detail of the cruelty happening inside his own home. She cut off his father's medication, ordered the staff to ignore him, threatened to throw him into a cheap nursing home, and smiled sweetly because she thought her fiancé couldn't see a thing. But Jared saw. Jared always saw. And he waited. He planned. He prepared a revenge so calculated that when it finally came down, she didn't even have time to regret properly. If this satisfies you, hit that like button to fuel more stories like this. Share it with someone who deserves a good revenge tale. And subscribe to our channel so you never miss what happens next. But before I tell you how Jared Kensington destroyed the woman who once nearly became his wife, you need to understand who he is, and more importantly, why the entire underworld trembles at the mere sound of his name. Jared Kensington isn't the kind of mafia boss you usually see in movies. He doesn't shout. He doesn't slam his hand on the table. He doesn't pull a gun to threaten anyone. He's something far more dangerous. The quiet and calculating kind. The kind who speaks once and expects you to understand that you won't be given the chance to hear it again. At 37 years old, Jared had already taken control of one of the largest underground empires on the east coast of the United States. From New York all the way down to Miami, from secret shipping routes to hidden casinos, from luxury real estate to discreet problem-solving services for the elite, everything lay in his hands. And yet, if you search the name Jared Kensington on Google, you won't find anything except the image of a successful chief executive officer of Kensington Holdings, a respected real estate and investment corporation in Manhattan. Perfect on the outside, darkness within. In his world, there's a saying everyone knows by heart. Jared doesn't warn twice. If he speaks once and you don't listen, the next time you hear anything, it will be news about yourself. No one knows where the saying began, but everyone knows it's true. Those who once tested Jared, those who believed he was nothing more than a fortunate heir born with a silver spoon in his mouth, all of them disappeared. No noise, no trace. They simply ceased to exist. In appearance, Jared stands 6 feet 1 inch tall, with neatly trimmed black hair and eyes the color of cold steel. He always wears perfectly tailored black suits, without a single crease, without a single loose thread. When he walks into a room, he doesn't have to say a word. The room falls silent on its own. It isn't respect. It's survival instinct. But the most frightening thing about Jared isn't his looks or his power. It's the way he speaks. Jared never raises his voice. Never. No matter how angry he is, no matter how tense the situation becomes, his voice remains steady, low, and unhurried. Those who've worked with him for years understand an unspoken rule. The softer his voice, the more dangerous the moment. When Jared whispers, someone is about to pay. Yet behind that cold, almost cruel exterior, Jared Kensington has a single weakness. A weakness he doesn't hide and doesn't need to hide, because anyone reckless enough to touch it wouldn't live long enough to regret it. That weakness is his father, Harold Kensington. Harold isn't only Jared's father. He's the man who made Jared, not in the biological sense, but in the truest meaning of the word. Everything Jared knows, everything he is, came from Harold. The way he calculates, the way he restrains himself, the way he turns his face into a mask no one can read, all of it was taught by his father. And that's why, when Jared discovered what his beautiful fiancée had been doing with Harold behind his back, everything changed. But to understand why Jared was willing to risk everything to protect his father, you need to know what kind of man Harold Kensington truly is, and what he sacrificed so his son could become the man he is today. Harold Kensington wasn't born into silk and privilege. He was born in a cramped apartment in the slums of Brooklyn, where the stench of rotting fish from the docks slipped through every crack in the walls, where the shriek of ship horns replaced the sound of an alarm clock each morning. His father was an Irish immigrant dock worker, a man who spent his entire life bowing his head before wealthy white bosses, and who died of exhaustion when Harold was 14 years old. His mother worked 16 hours a day in a garment factory and passed away 2 years later from lung disease. At 16, Harold Kensington stood alone in New York City, with nothing but his 2 bare hands and a vow. He would never bow to anyone again. From the smallest jobs, running messages for gangs, collecting protection money, Harold climbed each rung of the underworld ladder with something no one could buy: intelligence and calculated ruthlessness. He didn't kill recklessly. He killed the right person at the right time and made sure everyone else understood why. By the age of 30, Harold Kensington controlled 1/3 of the underground operations in Brooklyn. By 40, the entire East Coast knew his name. But what set Harold apart from other mafia bosses wasn't brutality. It was principle. He had a saying he repeated to every man who followed him: "Never betray those who trust you." It sounded simple, but in a world where loyalty was bought with money and sold through fear, it was iron law. Those who betrayed Harold didn't die quickly. They died slowly, and their deaths became lessons for everyone who remained. Jared remembers with painful clarity a night when he was 10 years old. That night, a rival gang kidnapped him on his way home from school. They locked him in an abandoned warehouse, tied his hands and feet, and called Harold with their threats. They believed that with a hostage in their hands, they could negotiate. They were wrong. Harold didn't call in men. He didn't bring guns. He drove alone to that warehouse and walked into a circle of 12 armed men as if he were stepping into his own living room. Jared has never forgotten that moment. The moment his father stood, surrounded by enemies without a trace of fear in his eyes, and spoke a single sentence in a calm voice, as though reading from a dinner menu: "Return, my son, or no one in this room will see tomorrow." 1 hour later, Jared was released. Not a single gunshot. Not a single drop of blood. At least not that night. But in the week that followed, each of those 12 men disappeared. One by one. Slowly. Methodically. That was the first lesson Harold taught Jared without speaking it aloud. Never forgive anyone who touches your family. As Jared grew older, Harold didn't give him an easy life. Even as the son of a crime boss, Jared began at the lowest position. From mopping the floors of nightclubs to standing guard outside meetings he wasn't permitted to hear. Harold wanted his son to understand that power isn't inherited. Power must be earned. He taught Jared through action, not words. Power doesn't come from money. Harold once said during one of the rare nights they sat side by side, "It comes from what people are afraid to lose if they betray you." And another lesson, perhaps the most important of all: never let your enemies know what you're thinking. Your face is a mask. Keep it cold. 10 years ago, Harold retired and handed the entire empire to Jared, not because he wanted to, but because his body wouldn't allow him to continue. Heart disease, high blood pressure, pills that had to be taken every day. He aged quickly, from a man who made the underworld tremble into an old man who needed to rest after climbing a single flight of stairs. But one thing never changed. Harold Kensington never once said "I love you" to his son. Not once in 37 years. And yet every action, from walking alone into enemy territory to save him, to staying awake through the night beside his bed when Jared burned with fever at 12 years old, to silently watching every step his son took on the path to becoming his successor, was proof enough. And that's why, when Jared discovered how Monica Ashford had been treating his father, he wasn't simply angry. He felt as if someone were tearing his heart apart piece by piece. Monica Ashford entered Jared Kensington's life like a cool breeze in the middle of a suffocating summer. At 28 years old, she was an image consultant for some of New York's most prominent chief executive officers and politicians. Her profession was to transform powerful men into powerful men who were also admired. She knew how to speak, how to laugh, how to tilt her head at precisely the right moment to make the person across from her feel like the most important individual in the world. And that night, at a charity gala in Manhattan 2 years ago, she used every one of those skills on Jared. What Jared didn't know was that Monica had studied him long before that gala evening. She knew what he liked, what he disliked, what he feared. She knew that Jared Kensington could be cold to the entire world, but there was one person for whom he would do anything: his father, Harold. And she built her plan around that very weakness. Monica didn't rush. She didn't openly flirt, didn't suggest, didn't do anything that might stir Jared's suspicion. She simply appeared wherever he appeared, said the things he wanted to hear, and most importantly, always knew how to step back at the right moment. She let Jared come closer. She let him believe he was the one pursuing her. She let him think he had found a different kind of woman among the thousands who surrounded him. And Jared, a man who had never trusted anyone but his father, began to trust her. 8 months after the gala, Monica moved into the Kensington estate. 12 months later, there was an engagement ring on her finger. The wedding was planned for March of the following year. Everything unfolded perfectly, almost too perfectly, according to the script Monica had written from the beginning. When Jared was present, Monica was the perfect fiancée. She cared for Harold, asked about his health, brought him his medicine on time, even sat beside him for hours listening to his old stories. She smiled at him with the warmest smile, touched his hand with the gentlest grace, and always reminded Jared that she loved Harold as though he were her own father. But Harold Kensington wasn't a man easily deceived. At 68 years old, he had seen enough kinds of people in his lifetime to recognize when someone was performing, and there was something about Monica that unsettled him. It wasn't what she said or what she did. It was what he saw in her eyes, or rather what he didn't see. Monica's smile never reached her eyes. When she smiled at Harold, her lips curved flawlessly, but her eyes remained cold, calculating, always checking to see whether Jared was watching. And each time Jared left the room, Monica's concern vanished as if it had never existed. She wasn't rude to Harold. She simply stopped seeing him. Harold noticed everything, but he said nothing. Not because he feared Monica. A man who once made the entire underworld tremble didn't fear a 28-year-old woman. He remained silent because of Jared. For the first time in 37 years, Harold saw his son happy with a woman. For the first time, Jared spoke of the future with light in his eyes. For the first time, Jared seemed to be living, not merely surviving. Harold didn't want to be the one who shattered that. He didn't want to be seen as a selfish old man, jealous of his son's happiness. He didn't want to drive a wedge between Jared and the woman his son loved, even though he didn't trust her for a single second, so he kept quiet. He swallowed every cold glance when Jared turned his back. He accepted every false smile as though it were real. He told himself that perhaps he was simply old, too suspicious, no longer able to judge people correctly. But Harold was wrong. Not wrong about Monica. Wrong in believing that silence would protect his son. Because Monica Ashford wasn't merely a greedy woman. She was a snake, and that snake was slowly tightening its coils around both father and son of the Kensington family. That Monday afternoon, Jared came home earlier than expected. The meeting with a partner in New Jersey had ended sooner than he'd anticipated, and instead of stopping by the office as he usually did, he decided to return straight to the estate. He wanted to spend time with Monica, perhaps have an early dinner with her and his father, perhaps simply sit together like a normal family. Jared entered the mansion through the side door, without announcing himself to anyone. His footsteps were silent against the marble floor, a habit ingrained from the years his father had taught him never to let others know when you arrive. He was walking down the corridor that led to the East Wing living room when he stopped. Voices drifted out from inside. The first voice he heard was Harold's, weak, hoarse. The voice of a man who once made the entire underworld tremble was now asking for the simplest of things. His father was asking for a glass of water, just a glass of water, because he'd forgotten to take his medication, and his throat was dry. The second voice made Jared freeze where he stood. It was Monica's, but not the Monica he knew. Not sweet, not warm, cold, sharp, and laced with contempt. The nurse will bring it. I'm not your servant. Jared couldn't breathe. Not because the words were cruel, but because of the way she said them. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a sudden outburst. It was the voice of someone who no longer bothered to hide her disdain, the voice of someone who'd spoken that way so many times it had become ordinary. Jared stood still behind the wall, his hands clenched, his jaw tightened. Every instinct in him screamed to walk in immediately, to confront her, to protect his father, but he didn't. Instead, he took a slow breath, waited a few seconds, then deliberately let his footsteps echo down the hallway before entering the room. When Jared appeared in the doorway, everything had changed. Monica was sitting beside Harold, one hand resting gently over his, a warm smile blooming on her lips. She looked up at Jared, her eyes bright. "Darling, I didn't know you were home early. I was just talking with Dad." Jared said nothing. He walked to the table, poured a glass of water himself, and carried it to his father. Harold looked at his son with an expression Jared couldn't quite read, then accepted the glass and took a small sip. "Thank you, son." Jared nodded, then turned to Monica and smiled, the same perfect smile as always. But inside him, something had cracked. In the weeks that followed, Jared began noticing the things he'd once overlooked. He didn't confront Monica. He didn't question her. He simply watched, silent, patient, as his father had taught him, and what he saw made the blood in his veins grow colder by the day. Harold's medication, the heart pills he had to take every single day on time, was sometimes forgotten, not once, but repeatedly. When Jared asked, Monica explained that the nurse had been busy, that she'd remind them to be more careful, that it was only a small oversight. But Jared noticed the medicine was usually forgotten on the days he traveled, the days he wasn't home. Harold's private nurse, who'd cared for him for 5 years, was suddenly reassigned to other duties. Monica explained that she wanted to care for Harold herself, that it was her way of showing affection for her future father-in-law. But Jared noticed that since the nurse had been moved, no one checked on Harold regularly anymore. Harold's room in the east wing, with its balcony overlooking the garden, was sometimes left without air conditioning on the hottest days of summer. Monica explained it was to save electricity, that Harold hadn't complained, that he preferred natural air. But Jared knew his father didn't complain, because he didn't want to trouble his son. Harold began eating dinner alone in his room instead of with the family. Monica explained that he was tired, that he wanted to rest, that she didn't want to force him to socialize when he wasn't feeling well. But Jared saw the way his father looked at the tray brought to his room, the look of a man who'd grown accustomed to being set aside. Each time Jared asked if he was all right, Harold smiled, a weary smile, still trying to reassure. "I'm fine, son. Focus on your work." And Jared understood. His father was protecting him, the way he'd done his entire life. Harold didn't speak because he didn't want Jared to choose between his father and the woman he loved. Harold endured in silence because he believed that was how a father loved his son. Realizing that hurt Jared more than any bullet that had ever grazed him. His father, the man who once walked alone into enemy territory to save his child, the man who'd never bowed to anyone, was now swallowing humiliation inside the very house Jared had built. And the person responsible for all of it lay beside him every night, a sweet smile resting on her lips. 2 o'clock in the morning. The Kensington estate lay submerged in darkness and silence. Jared was lying in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Beside him, Monica slept soundly, her breathing even, her face peaceful as an angel's. He had been lying there like that for 3 hours, unmoving, unblinking, simply thinking. His mind was processing every detail, the way he handled his most complex business negotiations. The image of his father kept rising before him, not the Harold Kensington of the present, a 68-year-old man with a weakened heart and slow, careful steps, but the Harold of 30 years ago, the man who walked alone into a warehouse full of enemies to save his 10-year-old son. Jared still remembered his father's eyes that night. No fear, no hesitation. Only the cold resolve of a man ready to burn down the entire world if anyone dared lay a hand on his child. His father had sacrificed his whole life for him. When Jared was young and understood nothing about the underworld, Harold shielded him from its darkest corners. When Jared grew older and began stepping into the family empire, Harold taught him every lesson with his own blood and sweat. When Jared was ready to take over, Harold stepped back without a single complaint, even though Jared knew his father still wanted to fight, still wanted to be needed. Harold had never once placed himself before his son, not a single time in 37 years. And now, inside the very house Jared had built, the house he bought so his father could spend his final years in peace, Harold was being humiliated, looked down upon, treated as though he didn't deserve to exist. Jared clenched his fist beneath the blanket. The anger inside him didn't blaze like fire. It was cold, cold as ice, cold in the way his father had taught him. But anger wasn't enough. Jared knew that. If he confronted Monica now, what would happen? He would ask her about what he had heard in the hallway. She would deny it. She would cry. She would say he had misunderstood, that she was only tired, that she loved Harold like her own father. She would perform a flawless play, and he would have no evidence beyond a single sentence overheard by chance. Worse, if he confronted her, she would know he was suspicious. She would become more careful. She would hide more thoroughly, and he would never learn the full truth. Never know what she had done to his father during the months he wasn't there. Never know how many other things had been happening behind his back. Jared needed to see everything. He needed to see Monica's true face when she believed no one was watching. He needed her to believe he couldn't see at all. The thought struck him like lightning. Couldn't see at all. Blind. If he were blind, Monica wouldn't need to perform anymore. If he were blind, she would feel free to reveal her true nature. If he were blind, he would become invisible inside his own home, and he would see everything. Jared almost laughed at the madness of the idea. Pretend to be blind. The most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast pretending to be blind to spy on his own fiancée. But the more he thought about it, the more it felt like the only way. His father's voice echoed in his mind, as clearly as if Harold were standing beside him. Know the position of every piece on the board before you make your move. Never act before you have all the information. Jared would do exactly what his father had taught him. He would know the position of every piece. He would see everything before he acted. And to do that, he had to become invisible. He had to make everyone, especially Monica, believe he was no longer a threat. A blind man can't see the contempt in another person's eyes. A blind man can't read messages on a phone. A blind man can't notice secret glances or false gestures. At least, that's what Monica would think. Jared turned his head to look at the woman sleeping beside him. In the darkness, she looked beautiful, peaceful, innocent. But he had seen another face of hers, and he would see much more. The plan began to take shape in his mind like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. He needed an accident. He needed a doctor he could trust. He needed someone who could help him stage everything without asking too many questions. And he knew exactly who that person would be. Early the next morning, while Monica was still fast asleep upstairs, Jared rose quietly and went down to the lower floor. He summoned Connor Walsh to his private study, a room no one was permitted to enter without his approval. Connor arrived within 5 minutes, as he always did. 40 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with military cropped hair and eyes that constantly scanned every corner as if searching for threats. Connor Walsh had been at Jared's side for 15 years, ever since he was a recently discharged Marine covered in scars, and without a dollar to his name. Jared had seen something in Connor the very first time they met. Not physical strength, though Connor had more than enough of that. It was loyalty, the kind that can't be bought with money or forced through fear. The kind that can only be earned by treating a man like a human being rather than a tool. 10 years earlier, during an ambush outside Philadelphia, Connor had shoved Jared to the ground and taken 3 bullets in his back. He spent 2 months in the hospital, nearly died twice on the operating table, and when he finally regained consciousness, the first words he spoke were, "Is the boss all right?" Jared had never forgotten that, and Connor had never mentioned it again, as if sacrificing his life for Jared were simply expected, not worth speaking about. That was why, other than Harold, Connor Walsh was the only man in the world Jared trusted completely. Jared closed the door to the study and motioned for Connor to sit across from him. He didn't waste time. In their world, circling around a point was a waste. I need to stage an accident. I need everyone to believe I'm blind. And I need you to be the only one who knows the truth. Connor didn't ask why. He didn't look shocked or alarmed. He sat in silence for a few seconds, eyes fixed on Jared, then asked a single question. "Is this about Mr. Harold?" Jared nodded. No further explanation was necessary. Connor had been in the estate long enough to notice the changes. He had seen the way Monica treated Harold when she believed no one was watching. He had seen the old man's expression each time Jared asked if everything was all right. Connor had never spoken of it because it wasn't his place. But he knew, and now he understood. "What do you need me to do, boss?" One question. Not an objection, not a demand for explanation. Just readiness. That was Connor Walsh. That was why Jared trusted him. The 2 men began to plan. Jared spoke. Connor listened, occasionally nodding or asking a brief, precise question. The location would be the old warehouse in New Jersey, where Kensington Holdings had an unfinished renovation project. It was a site where genuine industrial accidents had happened before, so no one would question another. The doctor would be Alan Porter, who had overseen the Kensington family's medical care for 20 years. He had seen enough in those 2 decades to understand that some questions shouldn't be asked, and some secrets must remain buried. Jared believed Porter would comply without needing reasons. The script would involve a minor explosion at the warehouse, debris striking the eyes. Jared would be taken to the hospital with his face heavily bandaged. Porter would prepare falsified medical records, documenting severe retinal damage. The official conclusion would state that Jared could distinguish light from darkness, but that detailed vision would never recover. The choice of partial blindness, rather than total blindness, was simple. If Jared claimed complete blindness, any instinctive reaction to light or movement might arouse suspicion, but partial blindness would explain such reactions as residual perception of brightness. Perfect. Connor listened to the entire plan and then nodded once. I'll contact Dr. Porter today. As for the warehouse, I'll have everything ready within a week. Jared looked at the man who had saved his life 10 years ago. Thank you, Connor. Connor stood, his expression unchanged. Mister, Harold is a good man. He doesn't deserve to be treated that way. Then he walked out of the room without another word. None was needed. Between men like them, loyalty doesn't require speeches. It's proven through action, and Connor Walsh was about to prove it once again. Thursday, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the news began spreading like wildfire. Jared Kensington, Chief Executive Officer of Kensington Holdings, had been seriously injured in an explosion at a warehouse in New Jersey. The papers reported an industrial accident, a gas leak, a stray electrical spark, shards of glass flying straight into the face of the most powerful man on the East Coast. No one questioned it. That warehouse had a history of accidents. The renovation project was unfinished. Everything made sense. Everything was flawless, exactly as planned. Connor called Monica at 3:15. His voice trembled, fractured, thick with panic. 15 years in the underworld had taught Connor how to perform when necessary, and today he performed perfectly. Miss Ashford, something's happened to the boss. At the New Jersey warehouse, there was an explosion. He let his voice break at precisely the right moment, as though he couldn't continue. On the other end of the line, Monica screamed in horror. She fired questions rapidly, her voice full of alarm. Which hospital? Is he all right? Is he alive? Connor gave her the information, then ended the call. He stood in the hallway of Mount Sinai Hospital, staring down at the phone in his hand, allowing himself a single second of a smile before his expression returned to anxious concern. The performance had begun. Monica arrived at the hospital within 45 minutes. She rushed into the private room where Jared lay, her eyes red, tears shimmering, her hair slightly disheveled, as though she'd run the entire way. She hurried to his bedside, took his hand, and began to cry. Darling, I'm here. I'm here. Everything's going to be all right. Jared lay still, white bandages wrapped tightly around his eyes, his body unmoving. He felt Monica's hand clasp his, felt her tears fall against his skin, felt her entire body trembling. If he hadn't known the truth, he would have believed she was the woman who loved him most in the world. But he knew. And every false tear only confirmed he'd been right to carry out this plan. Dr. Porter entered the room, his face appropriately grave. He looked at Monica, at Connor standing in the corner, then cleared his throat. Miss Ashford, I'm very sorry to inform you. The explosion caused severe retinal damage to Mr. Kensington. He can distinguish light from darkness, but detailed vision. He paused, as if searching for the gentlest words. It's highly unlikely to recover. Monica broke into sobs. She leaned over Jared, burying her face against his chest, her shoulders shaking in waves. No, that can't be. He can't be blind. There has to be a way. There has to be some doctor who can fix this. Porter continued explaining the condition, the limited treatment options, the need for time to fully assess the damage. Monica nodded, wiped her tears, asked the proper questions of a distressed fiancé. She performed flawlessly. But Jared noticed one thing. Throughout Porter's explanation, Monica never once asked how he felt, never asked if he was in pain, never asked what he needed. She only asked about prognosis, about the chances of recovery, about the future, as though she were evaluating a situation rather than worrying about the man she loved. Harold arrived at the hospital an hour later. The old man entered the room with slower, heavier steps than usual. He said nothing, asked the doctor nothing, didn't look at Monica. He went straight to his son's bedside, pulled a chair close, and took Jared's hand. Harold's hand was trembling. Jared could feel it through the bandages that covered his eyes. His father, the man who once made the underworld tremble, was now shaking with fear for his son. Jared nearly broke in that moment, nearly tore the bandages away and told his father everything was a lie, that he could still see, that there was nothing to fear. But then he remembered. Monica's voice in the hallway. Cold, contemptuous. I'm not your servant. He remembered the past weeks, the forgotten medication, the air conditioning turned off, the solitary dinners, and his father swallowing it all in silence because he didn't want to hurt his son. Jared tightened his grip on Harold's hand. "I'm all right, Father. I promise." Harold said nothing. He only squeezed his son's hand in return, and Jared felt a single drop fall onto the back of his own. Not false tears like Monica's, real tears. The tears of a father shattered by the belief that his son would never see the light again. Jared swallowed hard. He hated causing his father this kind of pain, but he would make it worth it. He would uncover the entire truth, and he would make Monica pay for everything she had done. 2 weeks after the accident, Jared Kensington was discharged from the hospital. The image of him stepping out of Mount Sinai moved everyone who saw it. A man who once walked as though the world belonged to him now wore dark glasses that concealed his eyes, one hand gripping a white cane to feel his way forward, the other resting on Connor's shoulder for guidance. Jared moved slowly, one careful step at a time, the cane occasionally tapping against a wall or the leg of a chair. When he returned to the estate, he deliberately struck the corner of a table in the foyer, forcing Monica to rush to his side. "Careful, darling. Let me guide you." He nodded, allowing her to take his hand and lead him, his face expressionless behind the dark lenses. Everyone in the mansion believed it. The butler looked at him with open sympathy. The staff whispered among themselves when they thought he couldn't hear. Even Harold believed it, and that hurt Jared most of all. His father watched his son grope through his own home, with eyes full of anguish, as though he would rather lose his own sight than witness this. Monica quickly embraced the role of devoted fiancée. She guided Jared through the house, describing the position of each object as if he had never lived there. She read his business reports aloud every morning, her voice steady and patient. She sat beside him at every dinner, cutting his food into small pieces and placing them carefully into his hand. In front of others, she was the embodiment of sacrifice and love. But Jared saw everything. Through a narrow gap beneath the dark glasses, he observed every detail Monica believed he couldn't see. While reading reports, she repeatedly glanced at her watch, her voice quickening whenever she thought he wasn't paying attention. At dinner, when she assumed he was focused on his plate, she secretly texted beneath the table, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. And whenever she turned her back to him, the sweet smile vanished from her lips, as if it had never existed, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. Jared memorized it all. Every glance, every gesture, every moment Monica believed she was safe because her fiancé couldn't see. She didn't know that behind those dark lenses, Jared's steel-gray eyes were recording everything like a living camera. But Jared knew that watching with his own eyes wasn't enough. He couldn't be everywhere at once. He couldn't hear conversations that took place when he wasn't present. He needed more. And Connor had prepared for that. During the 2 weeks Jared lay in the hospital, Connor had quietly transformed the Kensington estate into a hidden surveillance network. Microcameras were installed in strategic locations, so small no one would notice unless they knew precisely where to look. One in the East Wing living room where Harold often sat, one in the corridor connecting the bedrooms, one in the kitchen where staff moved in and out, and one in the study Monica had claimed as her own after moving into the estate. Audio recorders were concealed inside decorative objects, within potted plants, inside table lamps, in places no one would ever think to search. All signals fed into a small room in Connor's private quarters, a room whose existence even Monica didn't suspect. Each night, after Monica had fallen asleep, Jared quietly left the bed. He walked to Connor's room in complete silence. No cane, no guiding hand. In the dark space lit only by screens, the two men sat side by side, reviewing everything the cameras had captured during the day. No one knew about the system except Jared and Connor. Not the butler, not the staff, not even Harold. It was a secret between the two of them, and they would keep it until the truth was fully exposed. Jared stared at the monitor where Monica appeared in footage from that afternoon. She stood in the hallway, looked toward Harold's room, then turned away with a look of disgust she had never allowed Jared to see. His hand tightened into a fist. The hunt had begun, and the prey had no idea that the man she believed had lost his sight was, in fact, watching her more clearly than ever before. On the first day after Jared returned home, the cameras recorded Monica entering the estate's medical room. She glanced around to make certain no one was watching, then opened the cabinet and removed Harold's heart medication. Jared watched her pour half the pills into the trash before placing the bottle back exactly where it had been, as if nothing had happened. That afternoon, when the nurse brought Harold his medicine, Monica stopped her in the hallway. The doctor adjusted the dosage. From now on, he only needs half. The nurse nodded without question. How could she question the fiancé of her employer? Jared watched that footage late into the night, his face carved from stone. Heart medication. Monica was reducing his father's heart medication. If Harold suffered an attack, if he didn't receive the proper dose, the consequence could be death. And Monica knew that. On the second day, the cameras showed Harold stepping toward his bedroom door in the afternoon. He intended to go downstairs to the living room, perhaps to sit by the window as he always had, perhaps simply to escape the four walls that confined him. But the door didn't open. He turned the handle, pushed gently, but it had been locked from the outside. Harold stood there for several seconds, staring at the closed door, then returned to his bed and sat down. He didn't call out. He didn't pound on the door. He didn't complain. He simply sat there, looking toward the balcony with empty eyes, like a man accustomed to confinement. Jared saw Monica smile as she passed Harold's room that afternoon. She knew the door was locked. She was the one who had locked it, and she smiled because of it. On the third day, Harold's private nurse, who had cared for him for 5 years, was summoned into Monica's study. The camera captured a brief exchange. "We won't be needing you anymore. I'll take care of him myself from now on." The nurse opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to ask why. But the coldness in Monica's eyes silenced her. She accepted her severance and left the estate that very day, without a single farewell to Harold. Jared watched his father that evening on the recording. Harold sat alone in his room, looking at the empty chair where the nurse used to sit, and sighed. A sigh as light as wind, yet heavy as the world pressing against his chest. On the fourth day, Monica instructed the butler to remove all of Harold's personal belongings from the shared living room: his favorite walking cane, the family photograph he kept on the shelf, the armchair where he read the paper each morning. All of it was taken away. He should remain in his room, Monica said in a calm voice, as if discussing the weather. "It's safer for him." The butler nodded, not daring to argue. When Harold came downstairs that afternoon and saw his chair missing, he stood there for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his room without a word. Monica stood in the hallway watching him, and the smile on her lips was something Jared would never forget. On the fifth day, the cameras captured Monica speaking on the phone in the garden. She moved to a spot she believed no one could overhear, her voice lowered to a whisper, but the microphone picked up every word. "After the wedding, everything will change. He doesn't have long left anyway, and when that happens..." She let out a soft laugh for the person on the other end of the line. Jared didn't hear the entire conversation, but he heard enough. Each night, Jared sat in Connor's darkened room, eyes fixed on the screens, reviewing every clip recorded during the day. His face showed nothing. His voice didn't tremble. He simply sat there in silence, gathering evidence the way a man gathers weapons before a war. Each recording was a blade to his heart, not because he had been betrayed, but because his father was being treated as though he didn't deserve to live. After the fifth day, Connor stood beside Jared in the darkness, staring at the blank screen, and spoke for the first time. "Boss, we have enough." Jared didn't turn around. Not yet. Connor was silent for a moment. "What else do you need?" Jared rose and walked toward the door. "I need everything. I need to know what she wants. I need to know who she's talking to. I need to know all of it before I move." He paused at the doorway without looking back. "And Connor, find out who she was speaking to in the garden. I have a feeling this isn't just between her and my father." Connor nodded in the dark. "Yes, boss." Jared walked away, returning to the bedroom where Monica lay waiting with a sweet smile ready on her lips. He lay down beside her, allowed her to wrap her arms around him, and closed his eyes. But he didn't sleep. He was planning. At noon on the seventh day, Jared told Monica he wanted to take a nap. He allowed her to guide him back to the bedroom, lay down on the bed, and close his eyes. Monica kissed his forehead, whispered a few sweet words, then quietly left the room and closed the door behind her. Jared waited 5 minutes, then 10. When he was certain Monica had gone far enough, he opened his eyes, slipped out of bed, and moved silently toward the door. He didn't need a cane. He didn't need guidance. He knew every corner of this house, as well as the lines in his own palm. He moved without a sound, the skill his father had taught him when he was still a boy, down the secondary staircase, along the back corridor, until he stopped outside the kitchen door. It was slightly ajar, open just enough for him to see inside. Harold stood at the sink, pouring himself a glass of water. His movements were slow, his hands trembling faintly, yet steady enough to manage something as simple as that. He didn't want to trouble anyone. He didn't want to ask for help. He only wanted a glass of water. Monica sat at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on her phone. When she heard the water running, she looked up, and her expression shifted instantly. The lazy indifference vanished, replaced by open irritation. She rose and walked toward Harold with deliberate, heavy steps. Jared watched through the narrow opening as Monica snatched the glass from his father's hand. No words, no explanation. She simply took the water he had poured for himself, turned to the sink, and emptied it down the drain. The sound of water rushing away echoed in the quiet kitchen like a declaration. "You don't get anything in this house unless I allow it." Her voice was icy, stripped of any pretense. Harold stood there, looking at her without fear. 68 years old, ill, weakened, but still Harold Kensington. He didn't bow to anyone, and certainly not to a young woman trying to seize his family. "My son will see through you, soon enough." Monica let out a sharp laugh. The sound made Jared want to kick the door open immediately. "Your son? Your son is blind, old man. Literally." Harold didn't blink. Blindness doesn't last forever. Stupidity does. The slap came so quickly Jared almost missed it. Monica's hand struck Harold's face. It wasn't strong enough to knock him down, but it rang out in the empty kitchen, leaving a red mark on his cheek, an unmistakable display of contempt. Jared stood frozen behind the door. His hand tightened around the frame until his nails cut into his palm. Blood welled, but he felt nothing. The anger inside him didn't flare. It hardened, cold, sharp, like a blade being honed. "Watch your mouth," Monica said, her voice low with threat. "You're only still alive because Jared hasn't signed those papers yet." Harold didn't raise a hand to his cheek. He didn't step back. He simply looked at her with the same eyes Jared remembered from 30 years ago. The eyes of the man who walked alone into enemy territory to save his son. The eyes of someone who didn't know fear. "He'll know," Harold said quietly. "And when he does, you won't have anywhere left to run." Monica stared at him for a few seconds, as if weighing whether to strike him again. Then she laughed, a dismissive, contemptuous sound. The old man's lost his mind. She turned and walked away, heels clicking against the tile, not once glancing back. Harold remained alone in the kitchen, watching her disappear beyond the doorway. Slowly, he lowered himself into the nearest chair, his shoulders sagging as though the weight of the world had just settled upon them. Jared stood hidden, watching his father. Harold didn't cry. He didn't complain. He simply sat there in silence, alone in a kitchen that should have been a place of warmth and care. Jared wanted to step inside, to wrap his arms around his father, to tell him everything would be all right, that he had seen it all, that Monica would pay for every second she had treated him this way. But he didn't. Not yet. He needed more. He needed to know who she was working with. He needed the full shape of her plan. He needed every piece on the board before he overturned it. Jared retreated silently and returned to the bedroom unnoticed. He lay down, closed his eyes, and waited for Monica to come back. When she opened the door, he pretended to stir awake, rubbing his eyes beneath the dark glasses like a blind man adjusting to permanent darkness. "Darling, I'm back. Did you sleep well?" Jared smiled, the smile he had practiced for years. "Very well, thanks to you." Monica leaned down and kissed him, and Jared felt the cold press of her lips against his cheek. The lips of the woman who had just struck his father, the lips of someone who was about to lose everything and had no idea it was coming. 3 days after the incident in the kitchen, Connor summoned Jared to the surveillance room at 2 o'clock in the morning, his expression more serious than usual. "Boss, you need to see this." On the screen was footage recorded earlier that afternoon. Monica stood in the garden, near the back wall where she believed no one could hear her. She was on the phone, her voice lowered to a whisper, her head turning constantly to make sure she was alone. Connor had enhanced the audio and filtered out the background noise. Monica's voice filled the dark room with chilling clarity. "Victor, I've already told you. After the wedding, everything will be easier. He trusts me completely, and now he's blind." She let out a soft, satisfied laugh. "The southern shipping route? I'll have access to all the documents once I'm his legal wife. Just be patient a few more weeks." Jared stood motionless before the screen. Victor. Victor Petrov. The name echoed in his mind like an alarm bell. Victor Petrov had been the Kensington family's greatest Mafia rival for 20 years. He had tried repeatedly to dismantle the empire Harold built and Jared inherited. He had bribed Jared's men, sabotaged shipping routes, even hired assassins to target both father and son. Each time, Jared had defeated him. Each time, Victor had retreated with heavy losses, but he had never given up, and now he had found another path, a path Jared had never anticipated. Monica Ashford wasn't a greedy woman seeking a wealthy man's fortune. She was a spy, a carefully placed piece on Viktor Petrov's board, inserted into Jared's life 2 years earlier, trained to earn his trust, to become his wife, to gain access to every secret within the Kensington Empire. This was no longer a family matter. This was betrayal at the highest level. This was an attempt to overthrow everything. Connor, dig deeper. I want everything connecting her to Victor. Connor nodded and disappeared into the night. 3 days later, he returned with a thick file. She has a private apartment on the Upper East Side. Jared looked at the address, one of Manhattan's most expensive neighborhoods, where a single apartment could cost millions. Paid for how? Connor turned the page. Through a bank account opened under your power of attorney. Signed when you and she first got engaged. Jared remembered. After their engagement, Monica had asked him to sign several documents so she could manage certain household expenses. He had signed without much thought, because at that time he trusted her. Because at that time he believed she loved him. Connor placed another stack of photographs on the table. This is what I found in the apartment. Jared studied the images. Documents detailing Kensington Holdings' shipping routes, both legitimate and illicit. Detailed maps of warehouses along the East Coast. Lists of key partners and contacts. And finally, one photograph that made him pause. Monica and Viktor Petrov standing side by side in a restaurant somewhere, laughing together like longtime lovers. The photograph had been taken 6 months earlier. 6 months ago, when Monica still lay beside Jared every night, still told him she loved him every morning, still played the role of the perfect fiancé. Jared set the photograph down. His voice was cold, devoid of emotion. She doesn't just want my money. She wants my empire, and she's using Victor to take it. Connor remained still, waiting for orders. What do we do now, boss? Jared looked at the evidence spread across the table. Proof of Monica's betrayal. Proof of Victor's conspiracy. Enough to destroy them both. But not yet enough. The engagement celebration is in 2 weeks, Jared said slowly, each word deliberate. We wait. Wait? She'll give me everything I need. In front of everyone. He stood and looked out into the darkness beyond the window. Call Raymond Cross. Call Keith Morrison. Start preparing. Connor understood. Raymond Cross was the Kensington family attorney, a man who could turn any piece of evidence into a legal weapon. Keith Morrison was the most influential journalist in financial circles, a single article from him capable of destroying a reputation overnight. Jared Kensington didn't just want revenge, he wanted total annihilation. And he would deliver it before the entire world. 3 days before the engagement party, Jared told Monica he had an important conference call with European partners. He would be in his study all afternoon, and didn't want to be disturbed. Monica nodded, kissed his cheek, and said she would take care of dinner. She didn't know the call had ended 30 minutes earlier. She didn't know Jared was standing in Connor's surveillance room, eyes fixed on the live feed from the East Wing sitting room. Harold was seated alone, as he was most days. He sat in the chair by the window, gazing out at the garden with distant eyes. Since his favorite armchair had been removed from the main living room, this was the only place left where he could sit without feeling like an intruder in his own son's home. The door opened. Monica stepped inside. Jared watched her close the door behind her, and then do something that immediately caught his attention. She locked it from the inside. Monica approached Harold with the confidence of someone who believed she was in control. She pulled a chair across from him, placed an iPad on her lap, and smiled. The smile sent a chill through Jared. I want to show you something. Harold looked at her without speaking, without fear or visible concern. He simply waited, as if he had long expected this moment. Monica turned the iPad toward him. On the screen was an image of a nursing home, not the kind with gardens and attentive staff. This was the kind of place where people sent the elderly when no one wished to care for them anymore. Peeling walls, dim corridors, rusted metal beds, faces drained of hope, waiting for the end. I've already paid the deposit, Monica said lightly, as if discussing vacation plans. Room 14B, no windows, a shared bathroom with 6 other patients. You'll love it. Harold looked at the screen, then back at Monica. His voice remained calm. "Jared will never allow this." Monica laughed. The sound cracked through the room like breaking glass. She swiped her finger across the iPad and brought up the next image. "Jared will sign anything I put in front of him." In the surveillance room, Jared felt his heart miss a beat. On Monica's screen was a legal document authorizing the transfer of Harold Kensington to a nursing facility on the grounds of incapacity. At the bottom was a signature. Jared Kensington. Perfectly forged. "You see?" Monica leaned forward, her voice a venomous whisper. "It's already done. You just don't know it yet." Harold studied the document, then looked back at her. There was no fear in his eyes, no despair, only the astonishing calm of a man who had witnessed too much in his life to be shaken by a young woman's threat. "You think you've won." Monica rose and leaned down until her face was inches from his. "I have won, and there's nothing you can do about it." She straightened, slipped the iPad into her bag, and walked toward the door. Before unlocking it, she turned for one last glance. "Enjoy your final days in this house, old man. After the wedding, you won't see it again." She stepped out and closed the door, leaving Harold alone in the quiet room. He didn't cry. He didn't call for help. He simply sat there, staring out the window, releasing a long breath as though trying to bear the weight of the world. In the surveillance room, Jared stood frozen before the screen. Connor stood beside him in silence, not daring to speak. For the first time in weeks, Connor saw his boss's hand tremble. Not from fear, from the effort of holding back fury that threatened to erupt. Jared watched his father on the monitor. The old man sat alone, shoulders slightly bowed, eyes fixed on some distant, empty horizon. The man who once made the underworld tremble was now being threatened with dying in a miserable nursing home by a woman his son had brought into their lives. "Boss?" Connor's voice was careful. Jared didn't turn. His voice, when he spoke, was ice cold, stripped of emotion, and Connor knew that was the most dangerous sign of all. "Call Raymond. Call Keith Morrison. Prepare everything for the engagement party." Connor nodded. "What's the plan?" Jared turned, and Connor saw his steel-gray eyes. Cold, sharp, unyielding. Justice. One word. But the way Jared spoke it made Connor understand that Monica Ashford would never know what struck her until it was far too late. The engagement party was 3 days away, and Jared Kensington was ready to end the performance. 72 hours before the engagement party, every piece began sliding into place. Raymond Cross, the Kensington family attorney for the past 20 years, sat in his private office with a thick stack of documents spread across his desk. He had prepared legal filings for every possible scenario: industrial espionage, forgery of signature, elder abuse. Each complaint was complete, waiting only for Jared's signal to be filed in court. At the same time, Keith Morrison, the most respected journalist in New York's financial world, reviewed the dossier Connor had delivered to him in secret the night before. Video footage, photographs, documents, evidence of Monica Ashford's connection to Victor Petrov. Morrison had agreed to hold the story until after the engagement party, in exchange for exclusive rights to break it. It would be the largest article of his career, and he knew it. Inside the Kensington estate, Connor worked without rest. He rechecked every video clip, ensuring the image and sound were flawless. He backed up the files onto multiple devices in case anything went wrong. Most importantly, he oversaw the installation of a large screen in the grand hall. When Monica asked about it, Jared explained that he wanted to display a slideshow of engagement photographs for the guests. Monica smiled and praised his thoughtfulness. She had no idea the slideshow would contain something entirely different from what she imagined. On the afternoon, 2 days before the party, everything nearly unraveled. Monica was walking down the corridor when she noticed Connor slipping into the technical room for the 3rd time that day. She stopped, narrowed her eyes, and watched his figure disappear behind the door. That evening, while Jared sat on the sofa pretending to listen to music, Monica settled beside him with a worried expression. "Darling, I want to ask you something." Jared tilted his head toward her, keeping his face composed, though his heart had begun to beat faster. "What is it? Has Connor been all right lately? I've noticed he's acting strange. He keeps going in and out of the technical room." Jared felt as though cold water had just been poured down his spine. This was the most dangerous moment. If he hesitated, she would suspect him. If he denied too quickly, she would suspect him. He had to perform more flawlessly than ever before. Jared smiled faintly and reached up to brush Monica's hair in a gesture that felt natural. He's anxious about security for the party. You know how Connor is. He has to check everything 10 times before he feels satisfied. Monica studied him for several long seconds. Her eyes searched his face for the slightest sign of deception. Jared kept his expression perfectly neutral, his eyes hidden behind dark lenses, unblinking. At last, Monica smiled. You're right. He's always been overprotective like that. She leaned down to kiss Jared's cheek, then rose and headed toward the bedroom. I'll go prepare dinner. Jared nodded, holding the smile in place until she disappeared through the doorway. Then he exhaled slowly, his body sagging as though he had just stepped off a battlefield. Too close. The night before the engagement party, after Monica had fallen into a deep sleep, Jared quietly left the bed and walked to Harold's room. He knocked softly and entered without waiting for a reply. Harold was sitting upright on the bed, as though he had known his son would come. Jared didn't speak. He pulled a chair close and took his father's weathered hand in his own. The two men sat in silence for a long while. No words needed, no explanations required. Harold looked at his son, and a flicker of understanding passed through his eyes that surprised Jared. You're planning something. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Jared didn't deny it. Harold continued, his voice low and warm. Whatever you're doing, I trust you. Jared tightened his grip on his father's hand. I know, Dad. I know. Harold placed his other hand over his son's, just as he had when Jared was a boy in need of reassurance. Just be careful, son. Jared met his father's gaze, the man who had taught him everything he knew, the man who had sacrificed his entire life without asking for anything in return. I learned from the best. Harold smiled, the first smile Jared had seen on his father's face since the day he pretended to lose his sight, and in that moment, Jared knew that whatever happened tomorrow, he would have no regrets. The grand hall of Kensington Estate had never looked more magnificent. 150 guests, the most powerful faces in New York, stood scattered across the marble floor with champagne flutes in their hands and polished smiles on their lips. Manhattan's elite, business partners of Kensington Holdings, underworld figures disguised as respectable executives, and those who came simply to be seen, to be photographed beside the most powerful family on the East Coast. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light across the marble. White roses and orchids overflowed from tall crystal vases. A classical quartet played soft music in the corner. Everything was flawless, exactly as Monica had envisioned. Monica Ashford stood in the center of the hall like a queen. She wore a floor-length white gown that shimmered beneath the lights, as though woven from moonlight. Her hair was swept up, revealing the diamond necklace Jared had given her when they became engaged. She smiled, shook hands, embraced guests with the ease of someone born for this world. No one suspected anything. No one saw the serpent beneath the angel's skin. Jared sat at the head table, dark glasses concealing his eyes, his cane resting beside his chair. His black suit was tailored to perfection, but beneath the expensive fabric was a man counting down every second until the truth would surface. Beside him, Harold sat quietly, his aged eyes observing the room with an almost unsettling calm. He wore the gray suit Jared had chosen for him, still dignified despite the slight bend in his shoulders. In the corner near the technical control panel, Connor stood motionless, blending in with security staff in his black suit. No one noticed him. No one knew that in his hand he held a remote control capable of changing everything with a single press. After the party had been underway for an hour, Monica stepped onto the small stage at the end of the hall. She took the microphone, waited for the room to quiet, and began to speak. Tonight, I want to thank all of you for being here to share this special moment with us. Her voice was sweet, emotional, flawless in every detail. Jared and I have been through so much these past 2 years, but the greatest test came not long ago, when the accident happened. She paused, looking down at Jared with carefully rehearsed anguish. When I heard about the explosion, my heart stopped, but I knew that no matter what happened, I would stand by him. 150 people listened. Some nodded in approval, a few women dabbed at their eyes. Monica continued, her tone thick with manufactured emotion. I also want to thank Jared's father, Mr. Harold. She turned toward him with a smile that only Jared understood was utterly false. He's an extraordinary father who raised an extraordinary man. I'm honored to become part of this family. Harold said nothing, only inclined his head slightly, but Jared saw his father's hand tighten on his knee. In sickness and in health, in wealth and in hardship, I will always stand beside him. Monica lifted her champagne glass. Please join me in a toast to love. 150 glasses rose. Applause filled the grand hall. Monica's smile shone brightly beneath the chandeliers. She believed she had won. She believed this was her moment of triumph. She looked down at Jared, her smile unwavering. Darling, would you like to say a few words? Jared nodded slowly. Yes, I would. He rose to his feet, reaching for his cane. In the corner, Connor tightened his grip on the remote control. 150 guests fell silent, turning toward the man in dark glasses as he began walking carefully toward the stage. None of them knew a storm was about to break. Jared walked onto the stage slowly, the tip of his cane striking the marble floor in steady rhythm, the sound echoing through the silent hall. Every step was deliberate, measured, as though he were carefully navigating an endless darkness. Monica stood waiting for him, smiling with practiced pride and tenderness, as she watched her fiancé move toward her one careful step at a time. She extended her hand to assist him, but Jared gave the slightest shake of his head and continued forward on his own. 150 guests stood in silence, watching the most powerful man in New York now rely on a cane to find his way. Some faces held sympathy, others curiosity. A few whispered quietly to the person beside them. All of them believed they were about to hear an emotional speech about love and resilience, about a man who had overcome tragedy through devotion. They had no idea what they were truly waiting for. Jared reached the center of the stage and took the microphone from Monica's hand. He paused, as though gathering his thoughts, as though steadying himself before speaking. Thank you all for being here tonight. His voice carried across the hall, low and even, unchanged. I know you're expecting a speech about love, about unity, about the future. He stopped. The silence stretched just long enough to make a few guests shift uneasily. Monica remained beside him, her smile fixed in place, but something in her eyes began to flicker. But before we continue, there's something I need to share. Jared turned to face her. Monica met his gaze with the same softness she had perfected over 2 years, though a shadow of uncertainty crept into her expression. You did very well, Monica. 2 years of flawless performance. Her smile trembled. She didn't understand. Perhaps she thought it was praise, his own strange way of expressing affection. But his tone held no warmth. It was cold, colder than she had ever heard it. But you forgot one thing. Jared lifted his hand slowly, deliberately. His fingers touched the frame of his dark glasses. Then, before 150 pairs of eyes, he removed them. The movement was unhurried, almost cinematic. The glasses came away inch by inch, revealing steel-gray eyes beneath, clear, sharp, focused. Eyes that were anything but blind. The hall fell into absolute silence. Not a breath, not a whisper. 150 people stood frozen, struggling to process what they were seeing. Jared looked directly at Monica, and when he spoke, his voice rolled through the room like thunder. I was never blind. Not for a single day. Not for a single second. The murmur that followed crashed through the hall like a wave breaking against stone. Guests turned to one another in disbelief. Some covered their mouths. Some stared openly, unable to comprehend the revelation. Monica stood motionless on the stage. The smile had vanished completely from her face. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, like a fish gasping on dry land. No words came. Confusion drained into fear within seconds, the color leaving her skin until she appeared almost ghostly. At the head table, Harold stared at his son, and then, as understanding dawned, as he realized what Jared had done and why, his eyes filled with tears. Not tears of sorrow, tears of a father who suddenly understood that his son had been fighting for him all along. In the corner of the hall, Connor stepped out of the shadows. He moved to stand beside the large display panel, one hand resting on the remote control, waiting for the next command. His silent presence was its own declaration. Jared Kensington did not stand alone. Jared continued, his voice still ice-cold, each word precise as a blade. I pretended to be blind so I could see the things that only appear when people believe no one is watching. He tilted his head slightly toward Monica, his gray eyes piercing through her as though she were made of glass. And I saw a great deal, Monica. I saw everything. Jared walked toward Monica, each step firm and commanding. No trace left of the blind man who had needed a cane to find his way. He stopped less than 3 feet from her, his gray eyes locking onto hers with absolute coldness. I saw how you treated my father, the man who built everything you were trying to steal, when you thought I couldn't see. His voice carried through the silent hall, each word sharp as a blade. Monica took a step back, her face draining of color. I saw you alter his heart medication. Cut it in half. You knew it could kill him, and you did it anyway. A murmur rippled through the guests. I saw you lock him in his room for hours, like an animal to be confined. Jared moved forward again. Monica retreated again. I saw you fire his nurse, the woman who had cared for him for 5 years, just so he would have no one left beside him. His tone remained even, but anger simmered beneath every syllable. I saw you slap him in the kitchen. Monica swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit. There was none. 150 pairs of eyes were fixed on her, and not one of them held sympathy. I saw the apartment you kept with my money without my knowledge. Jared tilted his head slightly, lowering his voice to an almost intimate whisper that still echoed through the microphone. And I saw your partnership with Viktor Petrov, the man who has tried to destroy my family for years. The name Viktor Petrov sent a visible shock through several guests from the underworld circles. They knew that name. They understood its weight. And now they understood that Monica Ashford wasn't merely greedy. She was planted. Jared gave Connor the slightest nod, barely perceptible. Connor understood. He pressed the button on the remote. The large screen behind the stage flared to life. The first image appeared. Monica in the hallway, looking toward Harold's room with open disgust. Then the audio filled the hall, her voice sharp and contemptuous. "I'm not your servant." Gasps broke through the crowd. The next clip showed the kitchen, Monica snatching the glass of water from Harold's hand and pouring it down the sink. Then the slap. The sound of skin striking skin echoed through the hall like a gunshot. 150 witnesses watched Monica Ashford strike a 68-year-old man, the father of her fiancé, inside his own home. The next image. The living room. Monica holding the iPad before Harold, showing the photographs of a miserable nursing home. Her voice rang out. Room 14B. No windows. Shared bathroom with 6 other patients. Then the forged document appeared on the screen. Jared's signature perfectly falsified. It's already done. You just don't know it yet. Finally, the recording from the garden. Monica's whisper, clear and undeniable. Victor, I told you. After the wedding, everything will be easier. The southern shipping route, I'll have access once I'm the legal wife. The screen went dark, but the silence that followed was heavier than any noise. Some guests quietly slipped toward the exits, unwilling to be associated with what they had witnessed. Others stood frozen, unable to look away. A few whispered with open disgust. Monica backed away until her shoulders hit the wall behind the stage. Her lips trembled. Her eyes were red, but no tears fell. Perhaps she had forgotten how to cry without rehearsal. Jared, I can explain. Her voice shook, clinging to its final thread of hope. There's nothing to explain, Jared cut in, his tone glacial. The videos speak for themselves. Monica scanned the room desperately, searching for one friendly face, one sympathetic glance, someone to stand beside her. There was no one. Those who had laughed with her minutes earlier now looked at her as though she were venomous. Those who had praised her beauty turned away in revulsion. For the first time in her life, Monica Ashford had no script, no smile to hide behind, no performance left to deliver, only herself under the harsh lights, her true face exposed before the world. Jared slipped the dark glasses into his jacket pocket with calm precision. The wedding is canceled. My attorney will contact yours this week. He inclined his head slightly, a faint, cold smile touching his lips. And if you believe Viktor Petrov will protect you. He let the silence stretch for one more measured beat. He has far greater problems to deal with tonight. Jared turned his back on her and stepped down from the stage. No cane, no guidance. Each step steady and powerful. The stride of a man who had just destroyed his enemy before 150 witnesses. Behind him, Monica stood alone beneath the chandeliers, her white gown now resembling a burial shroud for the life and ambition she had just lost. Jared stepped down from the stage and walked straight to the head table where Harold was seated. He didn't look at anyone else. He didn't acknowledge the stares that followed him or the whispers spreading through the grand hall. He saw only his father, the silver-haired man sitting there with tears in his eyes. Jared took the seat beside him and wrapped his hand around Harold's weathered one. That hand had once held his when he was a frightened child after being kidnapped. That hand had taught him how to hold a gun, how to read a man's intentions, how to survive in a ruthless world. And now that same hand trembled in his grasp. Harold looked at his son, and for the first time in his life, Jared saw his father cry. Not loud sobs, just silent tears slipping down lined cheeks. The tears of a man who had spent his entire life being strong and was finally allowed to be vulnerable. "You knew, from the beginning?" Harold whispered, his voice rough. "Long enough." Jared squeezed his father's hand. "And I'm sorry I let you endure it." Harold shook his head, eyes still wet yet shining with something brighter than sorrow. "You have nothing to apologize for." He tightened his grip, pride trembling in his voice. "I'm proud of you, son." On the stage, Monica still stood alone. She looked around the hall at the faces turning away, at the eyes filled with contempt, at the world she had believed she conquered now collapsing around her. No one approached her. No one offered comfort. She was utterly alone. Monica bent to retrieve her handbag from the floor. Then she stepped down from the stage and walked past 150 pairs of watching eyes. No one called her name. No one showed sympathy. The sharp echo of her heels striking marble was the only sound in the hushed hall. She disappeared through the grand doors, which closed behind her with a final reverberation. It was a fitting end for someone who had lived behind a mask. The next morning, Jared rose early. He prepared 2 cups of coffee and placed them on a tray alongside the croissants his father favored, then carried them to Harold's room. He knocked gently and entered. Harold stood by the window in his robe, silver hair resting against his shoulders. He turned at the sound of his son's steps, and Jared saw a smile on his father's face, the first unguarded smile in a long time. "You embarrassed me last night," Harold said, his tone almost reproachful, though his eyes sparkled. Jared set the tray down, genuinely surprised. "Embarrassed you? How?" "I cried like a child in front of 150 people." Harold shook his head, but the smile lingered. "Me, Harold Kensington, crying before the world." Jared laughed, the sound unrestrained, the laughter of a man who had finally laid down a burden carried for weeks. Harold laughed with him, and in that sunlit room, the 2 men sat side by side, laughing as though nothing in the world mattered more. One had once been the terror of the underworld. One still was, but in that moment, they were simply father and son, loving each other in a way that required no words. In the weeks that followed, justice was carried out. Monica Ashford was indicted on multiple charges: industrial espionage, fraud, forgery, elder abuse. The secret apartment on the Upper East Side was seized. Bank accounts were frozen. Her reputation among New York's elite shattered beyond repair. No one wished to speak her name, as if she had never existed. And Victor Petrov? Jared didn't discuss what happened to him. Only one sentence circulated quietly through their world. Victor had serious problems that night. He won't be a problem anymore. No one asked for details. In their world, some questions are better left unspoken. Keith Morrison's article appeared on the front page with the headline, "Mafia Boss Pretends to be Blind to Expose Fiancée's Betrayal." It became the most read piece of the month, shared millions of times online. People spoke of Jared Kensington not only as a cold strategist, but as a son willing to do anything to protect his father. Jared returned to his empire. He remained calculating with his enemies, measured in every move, still the man the underworld regarded with caution. But something had changed. No matter how busy he was, he came home for dinner with his father each evening. Harold spent his remaining days in peace, no longer humiliated in his own home, no longer swallowing indignity in silence. He had his son beside him. He had the love he deserved. And this time, there were no dark glasses in the world capable of hiding what shone clearly in Jared's eyes: the pride of a son, and the love he no longer felt the need to conceal. This story offers a profound lesson about family and devotion. In life, the people who love us most sometimes suffer quietly, so they won't burden us. They sacrifice, they endure. They swallow their tears, so we can be happy. And it's our responsibility to truly see them and to protect them as fiercely as they once protected us. If this story touched your heart, please press the like button and share it with those you love. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more moving stories each day. We would love to know how you feel about this story. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every message that comes from your heart. Finally, we wish all of you watching good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days beside the people you cherish. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.